technically our first podcast came out on July 16th of 2021. It was actually recorded in June or May of 2021. Sorry, not 2021, 2016, when I was coming back from an EDM concert in Vegas, and I was staying at Neil's place. I don't know if you remember, Neil. I came back at 6
I
a.m.
remember
and
that.
you're like, what are you doing?
I gave you the keys to the place because I was
Yep.
like, dude, I'm not gonna stay up. And then you came in the really early mornings, and I was like, oh, you didn't
Yep.
need keys.
So
I
by
could
the
have
way,
just
just to
opened
recap
the door.
for everyone. So we started this podcast in Neil's place in Vegas, which he's now back in Vegas, or I guess he never really left Vegas. But key point is we started off using a Yeti microphone. It sounded like we were recording from a bathroom, and people would complain about that. We are well over 2,000 episodes now, and we wanted to share some key lessons because we're just a couple months away from actually reaching 7 years of podcasting. And it's crazy because the way we started this podcast was from a miscommunication we were walking down, I think, 3rd Street in LA, this like the Beverly Hills, Hollywood area. I was talking about podcasting, and Neil turned to me and said, let's do it. And that led to the birth of marketing school, which almost was business school because Neil thought that was a good name, but I said marketing school. So we worked on that one. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, so the big lesson, we've learned a lot of lessons, and some simple ones are like, we wish we kept our feed as with all the episodes we had because you just get more listens instead of capping it to your latest 100 episodes. That was a silly mistake that we made. But the biggest lesson that I learned from podcasting over 7 years is we didn't do enough podcast trades, and we didn't do them early enough. And we still don't do enough of them today. And if we did, we would get way more listens. I think we're getting close to 2 million listens a month now, right? It's something getting close to that.
1.7, and January is usually a good month for us, so it might be 2 million this month.
Yeah, and how many podcast trades are we doing a month? Are we dry right now?
We're dry right now. We're not doing any. So we did it just some context on the podcast trades for everyone. We did a trade with Jordan Harbinger where we traded 500K impressions. He also traded 500. And then you can track that through a tool called Pod Sites. And so we actually want to do a lot more of this. So if you're getting even like 300,000 downloads a month, just hit me up because I respond to the DM. So yeah.
But here's a problem. If we push harder on the podcast trades, even today, we would get to like 3-4 million listens really, really quickly and consistently. And we really need to do that. We should actually just have someone, don't we have someone who volunteered to help us with our marketing? We should have them focus on the podcast trades.
I don't think there's any, but if anyone wants to, if anyone's good at partnerships and a lot of podcasters, reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter. I will respond, or hit me up through email. But here's what we learned, right? The podcast trades help a lot. We should be doing a lot more of those. But also what we're going to be doing, if you're really good at managing short form video, we're kind of doing it on the Marketing School YouTube channel right now, but we want a lot more. Given that we produce a new episode every single day, and now these episodes are longer again, we want to go hard on short form because that's just going to expand our reach. Because I know when I think about the My First Million podcast, they're at 5 million views a month right now, and a lot of it's like the long form views on YouTube. So I want the short form to translate over into the longer form, and I want someone to just manage that whole thing, and then maybe we can work out a deal where it can be a very lucrative deal for you. So if you're really good at that and you have a proven track record, hit me up. But we know that stuff works, and we can easily get to 5, 6, 7 million a month. So
yeah, so the podcast trades is a big lesson. Not limiting your feeds is another one. The other thing that we learned the hard way is sometimes our topics are too niche, and the niche-y topics just don't get you enough listens. If we went a little bit more broad, it would have done way, way better. The other thing that we've learned, and we still choose not to have this as an interview podcast, but when you have other guests, it's much easier to get way more listens because you can have them promoted as well in exchange for being on your podcast. And a lot of the podcast people that we know, like, what is the other one? The Charm one? The
Art of Charm?
Is it Art of Charm? Like,
no,
they
Jordan
try to
Harbinger.
yeah, they try to get you to like promote the podcast if you get on the show, right? Like some of them will try to do deals. I remember, was it you connected me with them, and they asked a long time ago and they wanted me to promote the podcast, right? Which was it's a smart trade. It's just like, if you have people that you can get to interview on the podcast and they have a list or they have an audience, get them to promote it. It'll get you a lot more views. And we chose not to do that because Eric and I just want it where we're giving the feedback and the advice. I know he already has an interview style podcast series, but if we decided to do that, we would have done quite a bit better. The other thing that we found is the podcast audience monetizes really well. Eric runs a marketing school or leveling up mastermind, as he calls it, and he keeps the money from that, and he gets quite a bit of applicants from the podcast, and it, generates good income for him. Although he doesn't really care for the income, but it generates good income.
One other thing, speaking of just the affinity, the people that listen to the podcast. So I just remember anybody that's become a client through this podcast, the sales cycle is extremely short and the lifetime value of the customer is a lot higher. And so I'll give you an example. I was at a conference a long time ago, and really from that conference, we got 2 clients that had stayed with us for about 4 years each. That's a very long time for a client. And it was totally unprompted. I was just walking around and shared the story before, but he was just like, hey, podcast guy, like didn't even call me by my name, right? And then eventually it's like, oh, it's like Eric, right? And led to a great conversation. I hooked them up with the team, and then that led to a nice engagement. The other thing that's worth calling out, to Neil's point on the advertiser piece, is we haven't even scratched the surface on advertising for this one, and then now we're about to figure out a deal with Spotify. But that allows us to access all their Spotify podcast studios. So when I move back to LA, there's 18 of them, and I plan to use those. And then in addition to that, they have like a self-serve ad platform that you can use, right? So people can actually buy ads on our podcast, and we can actually select who we like and who we don't like. That's going to help us drive more revenue to put more resources into this thing. Neil's mostly right that we don't do interviews on this podcast, but every now and then, like if I find someone that's really amazing and they have something really interesting to share, I'll actually like share over their podcast with that marketing tactics onto this one. But those are few and far between. And sometimes we'll share some of the speakers from the event that I do. The other thing that we've learned is that in the very beginning, I don't know if Neil, take a guess here. When we started our very first podcast, the very first episode on where to learn marketing, guess how many minutes that episode was?
12 minutes.
Okay, close. 11 minutes, right? So we were at 11 minutes, and then gradually what happened over the years, like Neil and I would record in person at like the network studios in LA. Shout out to Mike over there. But we'd record there, and then we'd still keep it around like 5 to 10 minutes or so. But then when we moved away, pandemic happened and all that, like our episodes would actually go down to like sometimes 2 minutes or 3 minutes or so. And we started to get complaints from people. And finally, we've started to adjust it back into like longer form, 5 to 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. And, we can't batch 10 episodes in an hour anymore. That's okay. The other thing that I would say, which was a big lesson, is we didn't ask for ratings and reviews early enough. The more ratings and reviews you get, the higher up you're going to climb in the, let's call it the iTunes store or whatever, which ends up getting you a lot more downloads as well. And I think that was a mistake. And we also would promote our podcast episodes much more heavily at the beginning to our email list. And that caused way more views and more subscribers. But we stopped, doing that as well. But yeah, if we started doing some of those things again, I think the podcast would grow much faster. But if I had to take the biggest lesson I learned from having a podcast, the biggest mistake that you should try to avoid is we don't do enough podcast trades. That's the easiest way to grow. I don't know why we don't do it. Eric and I need to figure out a way to focus on it or have someone focus on it. Because if we did that, we'd probably get to 5 million listens a month really fast.
And I think we will. I actually tweeted earlier today on part of our plan to get to the 5 million. This is exactly the target's 5 million. So we will do that. And by the way, like the offer's out. If any of you out there are good at partnerships, especially in the podcast world, we're interested in doing trades. I might just do it myself because you and I already have the relationships. So I might just set it up and have my team take care of it. But if you're good at it, reach out to us. The final things I'll share and we can move on is consistency. Like we haven't missed one episode, and bear in mind we do batch, but close to 7 years we've never missed one. Doesn't matter if Neil has a baby, Neil gets married, or I get sick or whatever, or vice versa. Consistency is obviously a very big one. Most people actually give up before they even reach 10 episodes or even after the first episode. So you got to stay consistent. One big mistake we made was we were automatically publishing to YouTube, and the channel was just growing by itself. And the connection unhooked from the YouTube channel, and we lost access to the YouTube channel. And after 4 years later, I finally got the YouTube channel back. So we're growing again. So please subscribe to us on Marketing School. I think we would have grown like up to a lot because there are a lot of podcast channels there that are just strictly focused on the podcast. And then the final thing I'll say is, I remember when we reached our first 1 million downloads a month, we set up like an event, right? Event's a lot of work, but fostering a sense of community. I think we'll probably throw up like a free message board or whatever. People can just hang out there and like we'll pop in like every now and then. But I think it's just like, if we're going to have so many listeners, like I think it's a shame to not have a little community where they can hang out, especially if you can host it for like free.
Yeah. One of the things that we did, and this is the simplest one, is stay consistent. Most people ask us, hey, we're trying to get more podcast listeners. Why can't we do it? Well, the big reason is they're not producing episodes consistently. Eric and I produce episodes every single day. Sure, we record them in batches, but literally every single day, we haven't missed one day. And consistency is huge. And all of our friends who have podcasts who are consistent, they do much better by leaps and bounds, by factor of multiples versus the ones who don't.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. Sharing stories about consistency here over the years. We've been doing this podcast, I believe, for close to 5 years now. This is back when Neil lived in Vegas. It didn't matter. Like
Still
Neil
live in Vegas.
Oh yeah, still is in Vegas, but he lived in a residences on the strip before. Now he lives in a home. But I used to go into his home. I've shared this story many times. We've shared this, and it just didn't matter. Like if there's noise, we would turn the AC off in 116-degree weather and we would power through it. It just didn't matter, right? It didn't matter if I would come back from like a event, right? Like a concert, early in the morning at 5, 6 a.m. We would still do it. Like, and I would stay at Neil's place, right? It didn't matter if Neil was sick. It didn't matter if I was sick. Neil had 2 kids along the way as well. He got married as well. So we kept it going, right? And it's just a matter of consistency over the years. And many people tend to give up. They tend to give up really in the first month, the first 2 months, the first 3 months. I'm just not seeing any results. Podcasting is really hard. And it is really hard, but it's just like business as well. If you stick with it, eventually you start to figure things out. Most people just give up too easily, or most people take too much risk, take too much leverage, and then everything falls apart.
Yeah. And there's a few other things that we've done to really get our listens up. The first is partner with other podcasts. So we'll promote their episode or their podcast through ads within our own podcast, and they'll do the same vice versa. That doesn't cost us money, nor does it cost them money. More, it's a swap, and that works. And it doesn't matter what size your podcast is, you can just trade listens. So if they have 1 million listens a month and you only have 10,000, you can give them 10,000 impressions and they'll give you 10,000 impressions. That will help you get a lot more listens. Make sure you always ask people to subscribe. That helps a lot. Ask for the ratings and reviews. And also in your podcast feed, display as many episodes as they allow. Some people have it set to the last 50 or 100 episodes. The more you show, the more traffic you'll get as well.
Yeah, so I'll shed a little more context on this one as well. So we traded with Jordan Harbinger. We traded 500,000 impressions, and we want to be trading more impressions. And you can use tools out there like pod sites, for example, and they will let you trade, and you actually have reports. We're actually going to be moving our hosting soon, probably over to a Spotify host Megaphone. That's actually going to give us a lot more options to do trades like this. They're going to grant us access to Chartable too, where we can show demographics and things like that. So just find people that you're aligned with, and you can also make your own podcast network as well. So HubSpot has its own podcast network where they pay these podcasters, and also at the very bottom of the podcast art, it says HubSpot Podcast Network. That's helpful. The other thing too that we've started to do, and I guess we'll talk about that in the next episode, is starting to chop up this content, right? Because short form does really well, but we'll save that for the next one. And the other thing too is finding, when you interview people, finding people that are actually influential on the native platform, whether it's on podcasting or YouTube, that tends to help as well. And then just in the same vein of trading impressions, you can also buy ads too. So Jordan Harbinger spends millions on ads. We would just prefer to trade impressions. That's kind of like a form of doing ads. Your mileage may vary. And the other thing I'll say too is, for our podcast, there are a lot of interview podcasts out there. For us, for the last 5 years, we've been very consistent. I'd say 95+% of our episodes are just Neil and I riffing on things. And we just have a good relationship, so it works out that way. But, we have like 5% in our interviews. So I think what's important is zigging where other people are zagging. It's just, this is a different format. And plus it's a daily format, which most people don't do.
One of the ways that we're growing to 100 million downloads is if you've been doing podcasting for a decent amount of time. Well, I mean, a decent amount of time, I'm talking about if you have over 50 episodes. You'll start learning on what episodes perform the best and which ones don't. I'm not talking about just when they get released, but some podcast episodes perform much better in the long run. Some do better just in the first, few days to month that they're out. And you can start analyzing that to be like, all right, your podcast episodes that get a lot of downloads in the long run, think of it like evergreen. That's the type of stuff where you should sprinkle in a few times a week, and you should make sure that you're continually producing content that continually gets listens and downloads. So that way you can keep getting views, or not views, really listens. Because the big mistake that a lot of people make is they only focus on podcast episodes that just get a lot of views right when the podcasts first come out, because a lot of the analytics solutions out there focus on first 7 days, first 30 days. You got to actually start looking at lifetime and what's just generating a lot of listens over the course of that episode.
Cool. So I'm on this YouTube binge right now. So I'm going to go on a couple of things for YouTube. So YouTube, a couple episodes we talked about shorts. So shorts, strong discoverability. And then shorts naturally means you're publishing to Reels. It means you're publishing to TikTok as well. But also the shorts now, the algorithm is switching up where if they watch your shorts, they're gonna be recommending your long form videos as well. So if someone sees a marketing short, like Neil, like I've been looking at our marketing school YouTube channel, and some of our shorts are getting like 1,500, 800 views or so. And by the way, this channel is really small right now. It's only 2,400. And I know it's going to grow really fast. But also, so leveraging the shorts, which will recommend more long form, but also doing interviews with people, right? So interviews with people that are hot on podcasts or they're hot on YouTube or just like their trending topic at the moment. And then long term, maybe this is past $100 million or so, we'll probably invest into translations just because it makes sense, right? We've talked about kind of internationalizing, and because our volume is so big on this podcast, it's like every single day, it would make sense for us to push a little harder on it.
Yeah, the other thing that Eric and I are doing, and this has been helping us get more downloads too, every once in a while we start throwing out topics that just aren't on marketing. I know this is called marketing school. A lot of times we talk about entrepreneurship and things that are somewhat related. Like one of our previous episodes was Eric Goes Back to School. So when you also do broad titles, the episode could be focused on your main subject or your main topic, but when your titles are a little bit more broad, you'll also find that you'll start getting way more downloads and listens too. And that's a strategy that we've been using.
Yep. And my little hack too, because we have the Leveling Up private founders community, is to bring amazing people on stage, those trending people, and then interview them and cut them up into shorts, throw them on this channel, and then also throw the long form onto this channel too. The other thing that's similar to that would be newsjacking. And so the kind of similar to what Neil was talking about, we're trying different topics, but we're also trying trending topics too. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how TCG is betting $100 million on finding the next Mr. Beast. So sometimes we'll find some trending topics that are related to business or marketing, and we'll talk about it from a marketing angle because, well, this is called marketing school. And then sometimes we'll talk about it from a business angle as well. Neil, anything else?
That's it. Make sure you rate, review this podcast episode. Keep asking for that with your podcast episodes. It's one of the best ways to get more downloads. I know it sounds really crazy and simple, but ratings and reviews have a huge impact on where you place in the ecosystem, like in the iTunes marketplace, whatever it's called. You can end up just ranking higher if you end up having a lot of ratings and reviews.
Oh yeah. Final thing I'll add too is, one hack is hiring really amazing talent. So we're actually able to build a stable of editors using Upwork, and you can find amazing editors from the Philippines for $10 to $15 an hour, right? And some people might be like, "Oh my God, like what do you like?" $10 to $15 is a good wage for them in the Philippines. Like it's actually really good money, and they're actually pretty good at editing and they understand short form. And so for us, it's building that stable more. And because again, the volume of content really. The content is one thing, but the editing is really kind of the X factor, right? I was actually listening to him. He's been on a podcast tear right now. And Neil, I don't know if I shared it with you. I'll probably share one of the episodes, but he's been doing like these 2-hour, 3-hour podcasts. He did a really good one with the Nelk Boys. He did like a 4-hour one with these other guys. And he's on a podcast tear right now. And I remember one of the things he said. So Mr. Beast, he's probably the most prominent YouTuber in the world right now. Main channel has like 105 million subs. And then his other sub channels have like 10, 20 million subs or so. So he knows YouTube. And so he was just saying from like a content standpoint right now, podcasts are OP. And then gaming, that's known as overpowered. And what that means is the reason why he sees it that way is because let's say this is us doing a podcast right now. Okay. This is on video and we're actually publishing this to our YouTube channel now. So we're on YouTube, our marketing school YouTube, and we're also publishing this into shorts. So our team's editing all this, right? And I have no doubt that this is going to continue to compound because the thing is, let's say it's Mr. Beast. You don't know who he is. You see him on a clip, right? And you see a couple of his clips, and then you become more interested, and then you recommend it to his long form channel. This is all happening on YouTube, could be on Reels and TikTok as well. And then so discoverability is actually now a thing for podcasts, right? So I'll start off the context that way. He says, again, podcasts are OP because discoverability is now very much a thing because of these short form platforms. And some of these short form platforms are actually going to recommend the videos to long form as well on YouTube. And so that's why he's pushing so hard on podcasts now.
Yeah, I think podcasting is huge. I've talked about the stat before that I found online, and it's less than 4 million podcasts. The last stat that was published that I found from a reputable source versus over 1 billion blogs. It's straight up just an open ocean of opportunity. There's just not that much competition. Another stat that I found was over 100 million people in the United States listen to podcasts on a regular basis. The audience is there. The question is, do you have a podcast, and when are you really going to get into it? And I know the chances are you don't have a podcast, so you should create one.
Yep. Here's the other thing. We've maybe we haven't shared this before, but the retention on podcasts are second to none. And what I mean by that is when I look at a retention graph on YouTube for same video that we did, we had an episode on, eBay versus Amazon or something. And the retention graph on that one's about 45 to 50% on YouTube, which on YouTube, if you can get like 60% or so, you're in a pretty good spot. Now, when I take that same episode and I look at our Spotify analytics or our Apple analytics, it's basically 90%. And so if you want to build relationships at scale, if you want to really have the headspace, like take up headspace for a lot of people, then it's in your best interest to do a podcast. Now, it's on you to figure out how to say something interesting and how to differentiate yourself. But we've been doing this one for 5 years, I think, and I've been doing my other one for about 10 years. And so not only do you get to build long-term relationships, you get to learn a lot of amazing things. Other people get to learn from what you're doing. And now discoverability because of other platforms is becoming a thing for podcasts. And so now it's even more valuable than before. And by the way, like the CPMs, if you're trying to, make money from podcasts are crazy. And now if you can layer on your other channels as well and package them together, you're going to be able to do even better. So you can make your own little media company. Neil?
Same with advertising on podcasts. It's converting really well compared to a lot of the other channels that we see out there. Just like how radio still works and converts, assuming that you're with a relevant audience. It's a great strategy. And if you have a podcast, but you don't have an audience, funny thing that you could do if you want to be really popular is go advertise on other podcasts and make the ad for people to listen and subscribe to your podcast. Assuming the audiences are very similar, that's a really effective strategy for you to create a really popular one quickly.
Dude, and get on other podcasts too, right? Like if get on other podcasts, have that stuff chopped up, and then it's just gonna compound. And by the way, the final thing I'll add here is last month we did a 600,000 impression trade with the Jordan Harbinger show, and we grew a little bit. September we had a day less in September, and we grew a little bit. So hey, this stuff worked. We're basically at about 1.7, 1.8 million downloads a month right now. And on YouTube, we are getting, last month, we're at about like 50,000 views or so. And so we want to talk about overall views. How do we compound this? Because we have a friend's podcast. They get, I believe, 1.5 to 2 million downloads a month, but on YouTube, they get 2 to 3 million views a month. So combined, it's 5 million views a month. So I want to tell you how we plan on getting there. And hopefully we could come back to this episode in the future and say, hey, like these parts of the plan actually worked and we were completely wrong on these things. I'll start it off first and I'll kick it over to Neil. The first thing that we plan to do in terms of getting this to, let's say, 10 million listens a month is leveraging short form content. And so that means shorts, that means TikToks, that means reels. And Neil and I, we have a lot of sound bites, right? So on let's say this episode, there might be 2 or 3 sound bites that can be chopped up for, 30 seconds or a minute or so. And then we throw them up. There's good discoverability on these platforms. Shorts is particularly interesting because when you throw up shorts on YouTube, then that leads to discoverability for your longer form videos. And they're planning to do a lot more actually in 2023. And this episode's being released in 2023. We find that particularly exciting, which is why we're spending a little more on editors to help us get there.
Yeah, the other big thing that we want to end up doing is when we started podcasting, the way we first grew was email marketing, and we also grew by just being consistent, producing great content. Now, the email marketing helped us get a boost of subscribers at the beginning. We also tried running contests. When we hit 1 million, we threw a free event. But what's actually helped us grow the fastest, and this is just going to be the main tip I give, because we've tried so many things, but this has worked better than anything else, was impression trades. We go to other podcasts that are super popular. It doesn't matter how many listens they have and how many listens we have. If they have 5 million listens, we only have 1 million. We'll give them 1 million impressions of ads, free ads to promote their podcast. And even if they have 5 or 10 million impressions, they'll carve out 1 million on their end. and give us impressions on their podcast, telling their subscribers to subscribe to our podcast. That alone really started boosting our numbers, and we just got to do that in mass scale and just do crazy trades and continue to do this each and every single month. And I bet you within 2 years, it'll get us to over 10 million a month if we just did that.
Yep. And so I'll add a couple more things from my side, and we'll see what actually ends up working out, because we're going to try all these things. So all the things I talked about in the last episode that got us to 75 million or so listens, now it's just like, how do we take that and then deploy it over for YouTube? So the impression trades or collabs, you can call these collabs basically. I guess you kind of could do impression trades on YouTube as well, but doing collabs on YouTube, consistency on YouTube too. So just making sure that eventually, like, I'd like us to get to 3 to 4, shorts, reels, TikToks a day, and then continue to post each episode that you're seeing right now. It goes on YouTube every single day. And, people might be saying, oh, like, the watch time is short. And that's probably true. Like, some of these episodes are like, 4 or 5 minutes. Some of them are even 3 minutes or so. So we might even try experimenting with combining a lot of stuff together, where sometimes we'll combine a lot of episodes where we talk about SEO, content marketing, paid media, influencer, whatever it is exactly, and then try to make like a masterclass, where it's a longer form video, and then collabing with influencers on YouTube as well. So let's say, Neil and I were both in Vegas, and then let's have, the Hormozis come on again, and we'll do like an interview at Neil's new office, right? Or, Neil comes over to LA, and, we get some influential YouTubers on, let's say like Logan or Jake Paul, right? And we just talk about marketing. We just nerd out on business. Those videos guaranteed will do really well, not only on YouTube, but it'll do really well on like the other short forms. And also it'll do well on podcasts too. So I think we're going to be able to open up a lot more by attacking video more. And that's going to be really exciting, because I think, we've got the volume to do so. And here's the other thing. When you do collabs with someone, like, this podcast itself, let's just look at this as a property. We might only have 50,000 views a month on YouTube, but the fact of the matter is we have 1.7, 1.8 million views on the podcast, right? So there can be a quid pro quo where you find someone that's getting that amount of views on YouTube, and you can do a collab that way. That way it's a little equal, right? So make sure that when you're collabing with someone, you're at equal level, at minimum, or maybe they could be a few steps above you. That's how you can make it work. Otherwise, they're going to be like, why should I collab with you? Anything else, Neil?
Nope. Oh, last thing is you can always join a network too that already has tons of podcasts. It's similar to doing impression swaps. That helps too.
Yep. All right. That is it for today. Please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Let us know what you think we missed in the comments, and also subscribe to us on YouTube as well. See ya.